The courtroom was small, the kind found in countless American towns where justice moved slowly and decisions felt heavy as stone. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of curious onlookers, their whispers filling the air like static. Yellow light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the judge's bench where Judge Finn Harrington sat, his weathered face as stern as the gavel in his hand. To the left, Prosecutor Henry Lewis shuffled through stacks of documents, his expression confident, almost bored. To the right, at the defense table, Carter Coleman sat in an orange jumpsuit, his wrists marked with red lines from the handcuffs they had removed only moments before. Beside him, Public Defender Audrey Constance flipped through a thin file, her eyes tired from too many cases and too little time. But it was the girl in the front row who held the room's hidden tension. Larissa Coleman, 12 years old, sat with her spine straight and her hands gripping the straps of her worn backpack so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Her brown hair was tied back hastily, her sneakers scuffed and faded. Her eyes, red and swollen from crying through the entire trial, never left her father's back. Every few minutes, Carter would turn his head just enough to catch her gaze, offering a smile that didn't reach his eyes. A smile meant to say everything would be fine, even though they both knew it wouldn't be. Judge Harrington cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "The evidence has been clear." He began, his voice formal and measured. "The jury has reached its conclusion." Behind the prosecutor's table, Archie Wilburn, the wealthy businessman whose home had been robbed, leaned forward slightly, his walking cane gripped tight in one manicured hand. A faint smile played at the corners of his mouth. Prosecutor Henry glanced at Audrey with the satisfied look of someone who had already won. The judge's lips parted to speak the words that would seal Carter Coleman's fate. "The defendant, Carter Coleman, is found." "You're wrong, Your Honor." The voice rang out sharp and clear, shattering the courtroom's careful order. Heads turned in unison. Larissa had shot to her feet, her small frame trembling, but her voice unwavering. "My dad didn't do it." A wave of shocked whispers crashed through the room. Judge Harrington's face flushed red. "Order? Order in this court?" He slammed his gavel down hard. A bailiff moved toward Larissa, reaching out to guide her back to her seat, but she twisted away. "You didn't see all the evidence." Her voice cracked but grew louder. "You didn't hear the whole truth." Carter turned fully now, panic flooding his features. "Larissa, sit down, please. It's okay, I'll be—" "No, it's not okay." Tears streamed down her face, but her eyes blazed with something fiercer than grief. She stared directly at the judge, at the man who held her father's life in his hands. And in that moment, every person in that courtroom saw something they hadn't expected: a child refusing to be silent while injustice unfolded before her eyes. 6 months earlier, life had been different. Not easy, never easy, but different. Carter Coleman woke every morning before dawn in the small mobile home he shared with his daughter on the edge of town. The place was modest, its tin roof rattling in rainstorms, its walls patched and repainted more times than he could count. But inside, everything was clean and carefully maintained. Carter made sure of that. At 38, he carried the worn look of a man who worked with his hands. His frame was lean shoulders, slightly hunched from years spent bent over engines and wiring. His palms were rough with calluses, his knuckles scarred from slipped wrenches and sharp metal edges. He worked at a small auto repair shop, taking on extra jobs, fixing plumbing, doing electrical work, mowing lawns, whatever paid enough to keep food on the table and his daughter in school. Larissa was in 7th grade, a quiet girl with a sharp mind for math and science. She kept her head down at school not because she lacked intelligence, but because she knew what it meant to stand out when you wore second-hand clothes and lived in a mobile home. At night, father and daughter sat together at the small kitchen table, homework spread between them. Carter would help her with algebra, walking her through problems step by step, his patience infinite. "You're smart, Rissy," he would tell her using the nickname only he was allowed to use. "Smarter than your old man ever was. You're going to do big things." She would smile at that, her eyes lighting up in a way that reminded him so much of her mother. It hurt. Amanda Coleman had died when Larissa was 7, her heart giving out suddenly and without mercy. Carter remembered the hospital room, the way Amanda had gripped his hand and whispered, "If something happens to me, promise you'll love her enough for both of us." He had promised, and he had kept that promise every single day since. The town they lived in was divided in ways both visible and invisible. On one side lay neighborhoods of mobile homes, small diners, modest churches where working people gathered. On the other side, up on the hill, sat sprawling estates where families like the Wilburns lived. Archie Wilburn owned Wilburn Development, the largest construction company in 3 counties. He wore expensive suits, drove luxury cars, and donated generously to local political campaigns. People in town knew his name, respected his money, and rarely questioned his word. Carter had never met Archie Wilburn. He had no reason to. Their worlds existed in parallel, never intersecting until the night everything changed. It started with a simple job. The county contracted Carter to repair some streetlights near the residential area where the Wilburn estate sat. It was good money, the kind of job Carter couldn't afford to turn down. On the evening of the 10th of March, he kissed Larissa goodbye, reminded her to lock the door and not to open it for anyone, and drove his old pickup truck toward the hills. "I'll be back before 10, he promised. "Finish your homework." She nodded, already pulling out her math textbook. Carter left with his toolbox rattling in the truck bed, unaware that he would not return home that night. While Carter worked under flickering streetlights 2 miles away, 2 figures in dark masks and gloves slipped through a side entrance of the Wilburn mansion. They moved with practiced efficiency, disabling the main security cameras navigating directly to Archie's study. The safe was opened quickly professionally. Cash and documents disappeared into a bag. Before leaving, one of the intruders dropped a single work glove near the door, cheap cotton fabric, the kind sold at hardware stores across town. The kind Carter Coleman bought by the dozen because they were affordable. Within an hour, Archie Wilburn stood in his ransacked study phone pressed to his ear, speaking to the police with just the right note of distress. "I saw someone hanging around earlier," he told the responding officer. "Some repair worker. I think his name was Carter something. Works at that garage on 3rd Street. The investigation moved swiftly. Too swiftly. By morning, police had reviewed the Wilburn estate's backup security footage, grainy and dark, showing a figure of Carter's approximate build and clothing. They found the discarded glove and sent it for analysis. When they brought Carter in for questioning, he came willingly, certain it was routine. "I was working on the streetlights," he explained, calm and truthful. "I never went near the Wilburn house." But Detective Oliver Flynn, the senior investigator, saw what he wanted to see: a poor man with financial struggles, a man who had been near the scene, a man whose work gloves matched the one found at the crime scene. "Do you have debts, Mr. Coleman?" Flynn asked. "Struggling to make ends meet." "I'm always struggling," Carter admitted, because honesty was the only language he knew. "But I don't steal." It didn't matter. Within 48 hours, Carter was arrested and held without bail. The evidence seemed airtight: proximity opportunity, physical evidence, and Archie Wilburn's testimony. It was the kind of case prosecutors loved, clear and simple, with a defendant who fit the narrative perfectly. When the police car pulled up outside their mobile home in the dead of night, Larissa thought her father had been in an accident. She ran to the door, heart hammering, only to see him stepping down from the vehicle in handcuffs, a bruise darkening his left cheekbone from where an officer's hand had pressed his face against a table during questioning. "Dad!" She tried to run to him, but a uniformed officer held her back. Carter's eyes found hers, filled with a desperation that made her chest ache. "I didn't do anything wrong, Rissy. You have to believe me." "I believe you," she choked out. But he was already being led away, the taillights of the police car fading into darkness. Neighbors peered out from behind curtains, their faces a mixture of sympathy and judgment. Constance Hill, from 2 lots down, came out onto her porch, wrapping her robe tighter, her expression pained but helpless. The preliminary hearing was a blur. Larissa sat in the gallery feeling smaller than she ever had, watching her father stand in an orange jumpsuit, while prosecutor Henry Lewis argued that Carter posed a flight risk and should remain in custody. Audrey Constance, the overworked public defender, made a weak attempt at rebuttal, but had no evidence to counter the state's case. The judge agreed. Carter would remain in jail until trial. After the hearing, Carter was allowed a brief moment with his daughter. He leaned down, his voice urgent and low. "Rissy, listen. In my phone, the one I left in the kitchen drawer, there are videos. I recorded the work I was doing that night, just routine stuff to document the repairs. You need to keep that phone safe. Don't let anyone take it." Larissa nodded, not fully understanding, but committing his words to memory. That night, back in their empty mobile home, she opened the drawer and found the old smartphone. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the videos. There were several short clips, each showing Carter working on electrical panels in a residential area she didn't recognize. She checked the timestamps. They overlapped with the time the robbery had occurred. Her father had been somewhere else. He had proof, but she was 12 years old. She didn't know what to do with proof. She didn't know how the legal system worked, who to call, how to make anyone listen. All she knew was that her father had not lied. At school, the whispers started almost immediately. "That's her, the one whose dad robbed Mr. Wilburn." Students she had known for years avoided her in the hallways. A group of girls laughed behind their hands as she walked past. One boy muttered loud enough for her to hear, "Guess crime runs in the family." Larissa kept her head down, her eyes on her shoes, her heart breaking a little more each day. Only one teacher, Mrs. Helen Bridges, pulled her aside after class. "I don't believe what they're saying, Larissa. The truth will come out. Don't give up." But the truth seemed to be drowning. When Larissa brought the phone to Audrey Constance's cramped office, the public defender watched the videos with weary eyes. "This could be evidence of an alibi," Audrey admitted. "But the prosecution will argue it was staged, that the timestamps could have been altered. Without independent verification, a judge might not even allow it into evidence." "So what do I do?" Larissa's voice was small, desperate. Audrey sighed, the sound carrying the weight of 100 losing cases. "I'll do what I can, Larissa. I promise. But I have 17 other clients right now, and the system moves slowly." It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Larissa felt fury building in her chest, hot and unfamiliar. The adults kept saying the system would work, that justice would prevail, but all she saw was her father being crushed by that very system. She was called to testify at a pre-trial hearing. Prosecutor Henry Lewis questioned her with a tone that sounded kind but felt like a trap. "Did your father ever express frustration about money?" "He worked hard," Larissa answered carefully. "But he struggled financially, didn't he? Did he ever say he would do anything for money? He said he would work hard for money. He never said he would break the law." Henry nodded as if sympathetic, but in his closing statement he twisted her words. "Even the daughter acknowledges financial desperation in the household. Desperation that led Carter Coleman to make a terrible choice." Larissa wanted to scream, but her voice wouldn't come. Then something shifted. Detective Dante Hayes was young for his position, barely 30, with sharp eyes and an instinct that wouldn't let him rest. He had been part of the initial investigation following the lead of his superior, Oliver Flynn. But something about the case gnawed at him. He had watched Carter Coleman during the interrogation, had seen the genuine confusion in the man's eyes, the complete absence of guilt. Late one night, Dante found himself reviewing the case files in his small apartment. On impulse, he drove to the police station, where he knew Larissa sometimes waited on a bench outside, hoping for news of her father. She was there hugging her backpack, her eyes hollow. "You're Carter Coleman's daughter," he said, sitting down beside her. She nodded, wary. "I'm Detective Dante Hayes. I worked on your dad's case." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think there might be more to this than we originally thought." Hope flickered in her eyes, dangerous and desperate. "I have videos," she blurted out. "Videos my dad took that night. He was somewhere else when the robbery happened." Dante's interest sharpened. "Can I see them?" In the dim light of the station's parking lot, Larissa showed him the phone. Dante watched each clip twice, noting the backgrounds, the timestamps, the authentic quality of someone simply documenting their work. His mind began to race. He had been to the Wilburn estate. The area in these videos was nowhere near that neighborhood. "I need to check something," he told Larissa. "Don't get your hopes up yet, but don't lose hope either." Over the following week, Dante returned to the scene of the crime. He knocked on doors, asked questions that should have been asked the first time. An elderly woman, Bridget Farah, lived in the house adjacent to the Wilburn estate. She answered her door reluctantly, eyeing Dante's badge with suspicion. "I already told your people I don't trust police much," she said flatly. "I understand, ma'am, but I think there might have been a mistake. Do you have security cameras?" She did, and she hadn't reported it because no one had asked, and she assumed they didn't care about what an old woman had to say. Dante convinced her to let him review the footage. What he saw made his pulse quicken. A dark pickup truck, different from Carter's, had been parked behind the Wilburn property both before and after the robbery. Two figures were visible, neither matching Carter Coleman's build. One looked strikingly similar to Leo Rispin, Archie Wilburn's personal assistant. Dante sat in his car afterward, hands gripping the steering wheel, realizing he had stumbled into something far more complicated than a simple burglary. This was a setup, and a 12-year-old girl had seen it when trained investigators had not. Larissa couldn't wait for the system anymore. After Dante shared his findings with her, cautioning that he needed time to build a proper case, she made a decision. She would investigate herself. Dante had shown her a still image from Bridget's camera, the truck's license plate partially visible. He had told her not to do anything dangerous, but danger felt less frightening than losing her father. She spent hours online with her old laptop, cross-referencing vehicle databases, searching for businesses that operated trucks with similar plates. She found a small salvage yard on the industrial side of town, a place where old vehicles went to die. On a Saturday morning, telling Constance Hill she was going to the library, Larissa rode her bicycle across town. The salvage yard was grim chain-link fences topped with barbed wire pools of oil shimmering on cracked concrete. The air smelled of rust and gasoline. Larissa slipped through a gap in the fence, her heart pounding. Among the rows of dead vehicles, she found a dark pickup truck with the same distinctive dent in the rear fender she had seen in Bridget's footage. She photographed the license plate, the VIN number visible through the windshield, a faded logo on the door that read, "Wilburn Development, Contractor Vehicle." Her hands shook as she took picture after picture. Behind her, a voice barked, "Hey, what are you doing here?" A man in grease-stained coveralls strode toward her, his face angry. Larissa ran her backpack bouncing against her spine, bursting through the fence and not stopping until she reached her bicycle blocks away. She had the evidence. She had proof of the connection between Archie Wilburn and the vehicle used in the robbery. Dante met her at a coffee shop, his expression torn between admiration and concern when she showed him the photos. "You shouldn't have done that. It was dangerous." "My dad's in jail," she said simply. "What else could I do?" He studied the images, his detective's mind connecting pieces. He ran the VIN through official databases and found the truck had been registered to a company that contracted with Wilburn Development. More digging revealed that Leo Rispin had signed off on the vehicle's registration. The web was tightening, but there was more. Dante discovered that Archie Wilburn had taken out a substantial insurance policy on his property just 6 weeks before the robbery. The coverage was excessive, far beyond the value of typical household assets. When Dante cross-referenced Wilburn Development's financial records publicly available through county business filings, he found a company drowning in debt, facing potential bankruptcy. The robbery hadn't been about theft. It had been about insurance fraud. Archie Wilburn had orchestrated the entire thing using Leo Rispin to stage the break-in, then pinning it on a convenient patsy, a poor mechanic with no resources to fight back. Carter Coleman was supposed to be the perfect fall guy, a man whose conviction would close the case and allow Archie to collect hundreds of thousands in insurance money. Dante brought his findings to Oliver Flynn. The senior detective listened with growing irritation. "You're chasing shadows, Hayes. We have a solid case. The jury's going to convict. Why are you trying to muddy the waters?" "Because an innocent man is about to go to prison," Dante said, his voice hard. "And a little girl is going to lose her father for a crime he didn't commit. That's not your concern. Your concern is closing cases. Don't make this personal." But it was personal. Dante had seen too many lazy investigations too many times when convenience mattered more than truth. He knew what he had to do, even if it meant risking his career. As the trial date approached, the pressure on Larissa intensified. She was followed one evening by a car with tinted windows, the vehicle trailing her for 3 blocks before she ducked into a crowded grocery store. Dante, when she told him, went pale. "They know you're looking into this. Archie Wilburn has a lot to lose. In a final meeting before the trial, Audrey Constance presented a grim reality. I'll argue the alibi videos, but without corroboration, I don't think the judge will give them much weight. The evidence against your father is circumstantial but consistent. I'm not optimistic. Larissa looked at the tired public defender at Dante standing by the door with files he technically shouldn't have at the system that was supposed to protect people like her father but instead seemed designed to grind them into dust. She thought of her mother, of the promise her father had made at Amanda's deathbed. She thought of the girl she had been 6 months ago, quiet and afraid, and the girl she had become, the one who rode her bike into a salvage yard alone because no one else would. "I'm not giving up," she said. The courtroom was packed on the day of the final hearing. News of the case had spread a simple narrative that people loved wealthy businessman robbed by desperate poor man. Archie Wilburn sat in the front row playing the role of victim with practiced ease. Leo Rispin stood near the back, his eyes darting nervously. Prosecutor Henry Lewis presented his case with confidence. He walked the jury through the evidence, the work glove found at the scene, the security footage, Carter's financial struggles, his presence in the area. "Ladies and gentlemen," Henry concluded, "this is not a complicated case. It's a simple story of desperation leading to crime. Carter Coleman is guilty, and the evidence proves it beyond any doubt." Audrey Constance did her best. She presented the alibi videos, but Henry immediately objected. "These could have been recorded at any time, Your Honor. They're self-serving and unverifiable." The judge allowed them into evidence, but looked skeptical. Audrey called Larissa to the stand as a character witness, and the girl spoke clearly about her father's honesty, his work ethic, his love for her. But it felt like shouting into a void. Judge Harrington called for a short recess before delivering his ruling. When he returned, his face was set in grim lines. "This court has reviewed all evidence and testimony," he began. The courtroom fell silent. "While the defense has presented some questions, the weight of evidence supports the prosecution's case. The defendant, Carter Coleman, is found." That was when Larissa stood. That was when she screamed the words that would change everything. "You're wrong, Your Honor. My dad didn't do it." The chaos erupted, but before the bailiff could remove her, Detective Dante Hayes stood up in the gallery. "Your Honor," he called out, his voice cutting through the disorder. "I'm Detective Dante Hayes, and I have new evidence that I believe this court must see." Judge Harrington's face turned stormy. "Detective, this is highly irregular." "I know, Your Honor, but this girl is right, and I can prove it." The judge stared at Dante for a long moment, then at Larissa, whose face was streaked with tears, but whose eyes held an intensity that seemed to pierce through the courtroom's formality. Something in that moment shifted. Harrington had been a judge for 23 years, had seen countless cases, but something about the raw desperation and certainty in this child's voice gave him pause. "Approach the bench," he ordered. "Both of you." Dante walked forward, Larissa at his side, pulling a tablet from his jacket. At the defense table, Audrey Constance looked stunned. Prosecutor Henry rose, objecting loudly. "Your Honor, this is completely improper. The trial is over." "The trial is over when I say it's over," Harrington snapped. "I'm going to see what this evidence is, and if it's relevant, we will proceed accordingly. Detective, you have 5 minutes. Dante connected the tablet to the courtroom's projection system. The first video appeared Carter Coleman's alibi footage, but this time, Dante provided context. "Your Honor, we verified these timestamps with the cellular network provider. This metadata shows the exact location where these videos were recorded 2.3 miles from the Wilburn estate at the time of the robbery." The second video played footage from Bridget Farah's security camera. The dark truck was clearly visible along with 2 figures. "This is from a neighbor's camera that was never collected during the initial investigation. You can see the truck and 2 individuals. Neither matches Mr. Coleman's build or description." Dante pulled up documents next. "Here's the insurance policy Archie Wilburn took out 6 weeks before the alleged robbery. The coverage increased by 300%. And here," he tapped the screen, "are the financial records of Wilburn Development showing severe debt and impending bankruptcy." A photograph appeared of the salvage yard truck, its logo visible, Wilburn Development. "This vehicle was photographed at a salvage yard.
It matches the truck seen in the neighbor's camera footage. The VIN traces back to a company contracted by Wilburn Development, and the registration was signed by Leo Rispin, Mr. Wilburn's assistant. The courtroom was absolutely silent. All eyes turned to Leo Rispin in the back row. The man had gone pale, sweat beading on his forehead. Prosecutor Henry Lewis looked stricken, rifling through his own files as if searching for something to counter what they were seeing. Judge Harrington's expression had transformed from irritation to cold focus. "Mr. Rispin, please come forward." Leo tried to stand, seemed to consider running, then slumped back down. Dante continued. "We also have testimony from the salvage yard owner who can confirm Mr. Rispin visited the facility the day after the robbery to retrieve the truck, and phone records showing multiple calls between Rispin and Wilburn in the hours before and after the crime." "This is absurd." Archie Wilburn stood, his veneer of calm cracking. "That detective is making wild accusations. He has no proof of anything." "Actually," Audrey Constance said, finding her voice and her courage, "it appears we have quite a bit of proof." She looked at Dante with something like awe. "Your Honor, I move that all charges against Carter Coleman be dismissed immediately, and that the court investigate Archie Wilburn and Leo Rispin for conspiracy fraud and filing a false police report." Judge Harrington turned to Prosecutor Henry. "Mr. Lewis, I assume you'll want time to review this evidence." Henry looked between the screen, his notes, and the crumbling confidence in his case. "Aye, Your Honor. If this evidence is authentic, and it appears to be, then the state cannot proceed with this prosecution in good faith." The judge nodded slowly. "I'm not one for theatrical reversals, but I'm also not one to ignore the truth when it's laid out in front of me." He looked directly at Carter Coleman. "Mr. Coleman, this court apologizes. The charges against you are dismissed. Bailiff, release him immediately." The courtroom exploded. People shouted, gasped, stood up in confusion and excitement. Archie Wilburn tried to push toward the exit, but two officers moved to block his path. Leo Rispin broke down, burying his face in his hands. "He told me to do it," Leo sobbed. "Wilburn said no one would believe a guy like Coleman over us. He said it was foolproof." Carter Coleman sat in shock as the bailiff unlocked his handcuffs. His hands were shaking as he stood looking around as if he couldn't quite believe what was happening. Then he saw Larissa pushing through the crowd toward him, and nothing else mattered. He dropped to his knees as she crashed into him, wrapping her arms around his neck and sobbing into his shoulder. "I knew you didn't do it," she whispered. "I knew. You saved me," he whispered back, his voice breaking. "You saved me, Rissy." Behind them, Judge Harrington ordered Archie Wilburn and Leo Rispin detained pending investigation. Prosecutor Henry Lewis approached Audrey Constance and Dante Hayes. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I should have looked deeper. I let convenience override justice." Dante nodded, accepting the words, but feeling the weight of how close they had come to destroying an innocent man's life. He glanced at Larissa, still holding on to her father, as if she would never let go, and felt something settle in his chest. This was why he had become a detective, not to close cases quickly, but to find truth no matter how inconvenient. The following weeks brought the kind of justice that restored a small measure of faith. Archie Wilburn was formally charged with insurance fraud conspiracy and witness tampering. Leo Rispin offered a plea deal in exchange for testimony confirmed every detail of the scheme. Wilburn Development filed for bankruptcy, its assets frozen pending legal proceedings. The insurance company launched its own investigation, ensuring that Archie would not see a cent of the money he had tried to steal. Carter Coleman returned to work at the garage, where his boss welcomed him back with a raise and an apology for ever doubting him. The town, which had been so quick to judge, now fell over itself to make amends. People stopped by the mobile home with casseroles and offers of help, awkward apologies on their lips. Carter accepted them with grace, though Larissa could see the hurt still lingered in his eyes. At school, the whispers changed. Now they said, "That's the girl who stood up in court. That's the one who proved her dad was innocent." Students who had mocked her approached cautiously, some apologizing, others simply staring with newfound respect. Larissa didn't let it change her. She still sat in the same seat, still wore the same worn sneakers, still focused on her math homework. But something inside her had shifted, hardened and strengthened like steel forged in fire.
The county offered Carter a settlement, a modest amount that would never truly compensate for the months stolen from his life, but would at least provide some financial cushion. He used part of it to make repairs to the mobile home, fixing the rattling roof and patching the walls properly. He bought Larissa new school supplies and a better laptop. The rest he put into savings, thinking about the future, about college funds and emergency reserves. One evening, Dante stopped by with a bag of books about forensic science and criminal justice. "I thought you might be interested," he told Larissa, handing them over. "You have the instincts of an investigator. If you ever want to pursue this field, you'd be excellent at it." She took the books, weighing them in her hands. "Do you think things will really change, or will the system keep crushing people like my dad?" Dante sat down on the porch steps beside her. "The system is made of people," he said carefully. "Some good, some lazy, some corrupt. But when good people refuse to stay silent, when they fight for the truth, even when it's hard, the system can work. It's not perfect, but it's not hopeless either." "You sound like you're trying to convince yourself," Larissa observed. He smiled slightly. "Maybe I am." Inside the mobile home, Carter made dinner, the scent of frying onions and peppers drifting through the screen door. The little radio on the counter played country music, and for the first time in months, he hummed along. He glanced out the window at his daughter sitting with the detective who had believed in them when no one else had, and felt something close to peace. That night, after Dante had gone and the dishes were washed, Carter and Larissa sat on the front steps together, looking up at a sky full of stars. The air was warm, crickets singing in the grass, and the world felt both vast and intimate. "I'm sorry you had to go through all that," Carter said quietly. "You're 12. You should have been worrying about homework and friends, not fighting to keep your dad out of prison." Larissa leaned her head against his shoulder. "If I hadn't fought, you'd still be in there. I couldn't live in a world where good people stay silent while bad things happen." Carter wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "Your mom would be so proud of you. I'm proud of you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, father and daughter, two people who had stared into the abyss of injustice and somehow pulled each other back from the edge. The mobile home behind them was small and shabby, their savings minimal, their future uncertain. But they had each other. They had truth. They had proof that even the smallest voice raised at the right moment could shatter the carefully constructed lies of the powerful. In the distance, a train whistle blew its lonely sound, carrying across the quiet town. Larissa thought about the past months, about the fear and anger and determination that had consumed her. She thought about standing in that courtroom, heart-hammering, voice-breaking, screaming words that should never have needed to be screamed. "You're wrong, Your Honor." She thought about how close they had come to losing everything and how a system designed to protect the innocent had nearly destroyed them instead. But she also thought about Dante, who had refused to look away, about Bridget Farah, who had saved her camera footage, about Mrs. Bridges at school, who had told her not to give up, about her father, who had maintained his dignity and honesty even when the world called him a liar and a thief. Good people existed. They were outnumbered sometimes, drowned out by convenience and prejudice and the lazy machinery of a system that prioritized easy answers over hard truths. But they existed. "Dad," Larissa said softly. "Yeah, Rissy. I'm not going to be quiet anymore. When I see something wrong, I'm going to speak up, even when it's scary, even when no one wants to hear it." Carter smiled, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I know you will. That's exactly who you are." Above them, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human drama, but bearing witness nonetheless. Inside the mobile home, a small frame hung on the wall, something Larissa had made in the days after her father's release. She had written in careful letters, "My dad didn't do it, and I proved it." It wasn't elegant or artistic, just plain truth stated simply. But it was hers, a reminder of the moment when a child's voice had been louder than the gavel, when love had been stronger than lies. The night deepened, and eventually they went inside, locking the door behind them, safe in their small space. Tomorrow, Carter would return to the garage, and Larissa would go to school, and life would continue its ordinary rhythm. But neither of them would ever forget the lesson learned in a courtroom, on a day when justice nearly failed but ultimately prevailed, that silence in the face of injustice is complicity, and that sometimes the smallest among us must be the bravest. In a world that too often values power over truth and convenience over courage, they had proven that one voice raised in defiance and backed by love could change everything, and that truth once spoken loudly enough cannot be ignored.